Hi, you're watching Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone, and last week I finally got around to seeing the brand new Sam Mendes film 1917 at the movies. Now, before I go any further, please be warned, this video is going to contain spoilers for the film. So if you don't want anything spoiled, you haven't seen the film yet, and you don't want to know anything about it, shut this video off right now, go away, watch the movie, and then come back later and watch this video afterwards. In this video, what I want to do is I want to talk about how I think that this film really reinforces the point, the controversial, which I don't think should have been controversial, but became a big controversy, that the point that Martin Scorsese made late last year, about how big franchise films, and he dropped the Marvel name into the mix, how big franchise films are not the same as authentic cinema. And I think this movie, 1917, actually reinforces that point and backs up what Scorsese is saying. But before I get into that and explain why I think that is so, I just want to talk about the film itself and my experience of it and some of the aspects of it that I just think, for me, made it such a glorious and enjoyable cinematic experience. First of all, I like Sam Mendes films. If you are a regular on my channel, if you're not, go and subscribe, please, and check out the content that's on there. But you will see, just a couple of months ago, I made a video about one of my favourite films of all time, which is also another Sam Mendes film, and that is Road to Perdition. I love Sam Mendes' cinematic sensibility and the style and the way that he makes a film, what he brings to a film when he makes a movie. He's made some of my favourite films, and films that I think really still stand up very strongly. I think one of the best Bond films, or in my opinion, probably the best Bond film ever made, Skyfall. This is a Sam Mendes film. This is a guy who has a unique sensibility, and he brings that to his filmmaking. This is a great filmmaker who has a very respectable body of work already, and who has, I think, experience. And this movie, I think you see this, and it's coupled with the fact that he's working again with Roger Deakins. I'm going to talk about the cinematography in a minute, because the cinematography in this film is just phenomenal, and he has partnered with Deakins previously. And again, this partnership, there's a great fruitfulness, a cinematic, artistic fruitfulness to this partnership, and you see it again here in 1917. First of all, this is a uniquely immersive film. In my country here in New Zealand, World War I has a special sort of pride of place for us. It is probably the war, more than any other war, that has the most meaning for us as a nation, because so many of our men and women who went over there and participated in other roles, but so many of our men fought and died in that war. And the whole Anzac tradition is very much born in the fires of that awful conflict. So it's something that we know a lot about in our country here. Most people, depending on their age, will either have a father or a grandfather, a great-grandfather or a great-great-grandfather who fought in that war. They have a family member in their lineage who actually participated in that war. That's very common. It's something that is taught about in our schools. It is something that, like Anzac Day, coming up again in a few weeks in April, for us is a very, very important memorial. The schools get involved, the whole fields of poppies and stuff like that. It's a really important part of our history. So we know a lot about this war. And this is something, I have a great-grandfather who fought in World War I. I've watched a lot of documentaries about it. I've read about it. You know, we understand this war. But this film, 1917, despite the fact that I would sort of pride myself on knowing a reasonable amount about understanding that war and the day-to-day sort of grind, if you like, of what it was to be a soldier in that war, this film, 1917, still managed to immerse me in that war in a way that was new and very different, and it opened my eyes to things that I hadn't really probably understood fully before. And the way that it works really is the fact that you've got this constant long shot, and the way the camera is moving with these characters. They're not suddenly cutting from one set to the next set. They're not cutting from one scene to the next. They are moving through sets and through scenes. And so all of a sudden you are immersed and you understand, or I did anyway, in a very new and different and deeper kind of way, what life for a soldier was like, the interplay between the countryside and then the sort of the brutalities and the ugliness of what trench lifestyle was like for these men. And then for me in particular, I think it really brought alive no man's land in a new way. I've seen that in other films. Plenty of World War I movies have depicted this. But the way this does it in a very immersive kind of way, I think what it does is it gives you a sense. It brings the map, if you like, of that conflict alive in a very unique kind of way. And for me, I got a real, very different and very new and much deeper appreciation for exactly the sort of the struggles, the challenges, the sacrifices that were made by those men and what it meant to be involved in that conflict. And so it's uniquely immersive. I think it also presents, based on what I've read, I've never participated in war, so I say this as someone who's never been a soldier, but from what I've read a lot of biographies, and I've read soldiers talking about war, and one consistent thing that seems to be the norm with most military conflict situations is that war is not like what you see in the movies. It's not one huge battle zone where everyone is fighting everyone else all at once. That's a very sort of movie, perhaps what you might call fictionalized or stylized vision of what war is actually like. Instead, what I've read in biographies of various soldiers is that war tends to be a lot of tedium, a lot of boredom, and then you have these moments of sort of brutal and barbaric, intense violence and fighting that break out. And often in wars like this, you would have these situations where there'd be a battle. Say if you were looking at it like an aerial map, on one corner there'd be a very intense battle raging, and then people would be at the other end of the map, relatively close, but not involved in that fighting. And I think this movie really portrayed that and gave you a sense of how that could actually play out in the real world in a way, I think, that that gave a sense of authenticity to it. Now, again, I have to qualify those remarks as someone who's never been a soldier, but reading the biographies of soldiers, this seems to be a more authentic portrayal of the way in which the life of a soldier, particularly in these types of conflicts, would actually play out. The soundtrack by Thomas Newman I think, is just something special, and it really adds to the film. There's one track in particular, if you want to go and check it out on Spotify, is check out the piece that he composed called The Night Window. And this is the track that is playing that during when he's in that bombed out city overnight. And the sort of intensity of that, and you know, he's trying to escape from the Germans who are there. He finds that young girl with the baby. That particular sequence, the night window, is part of that. There's just something special about that composition, and it is so beautiful in the context of this film. When you bring this together with the cinematography and the story that's being told, there's just something special here. But that composition in and of itself has a special kind of cinematic musicality to it that just elevates things. It's not just your run-of-the-mill stock music. It really does. Have a listen to it, and I think you'll see what I mean. Really, when it builds into its crescendo in particular, you will hear the way in which this piece just soars and has a sort of almost mystical quality to it. And it's so perfect, so very, very perfect for that aspect of this film when those scenes are unfolding. Which brings me to, I think, probably the man of the hour, and the thing that everyone is really talking a lot about with this film, and that is the cinematography of Roger Deakins. This film is phenomenal. Roger Deakins, in my humble opinion, is one of the best cinematographers to have ever made movies. And it seems to me that in the last 10 years or so, he has just grown another leg. His artistic ability has just gone on in leaps and bounds. Think about films like Blade Runner 2049, Sicario, Prisoners, Skyfall. Skyfall is, in my humble opinion, the best Bond movie that's ever been made for a lot of reasons. And again, you've got this partnership of Sam Mendes and Roger Deakins. And the cinematography in that, you see these moments again where they are just signature Roger Deakins cinematography, and they elevate this film in a way that is very different to other Bond films. And when it's coupled with the storytelling sensibilities and what Sam Mendes is doing with these characters, this is not just a Bond film. It's really quite amazing. It's actually a film, Skyfall, go back and watch it if you haven't seen it in a while, and you realize this is a film about legacy. It's about morality. It's about the ethics of what you leave behind and your actions in the world and how they change the world. It's actually quite a profound film. It really is quite a profound film. And so Deakins is a part of that, and the cinematography is a big part of that film. The opening scene in Skyfall is a great example of this, because one of the things that Deakins does well, and you see this a lot in 1917, is the use of natural lighting. In that opening scene of Skyfall, he does this in that hotel room. He uses the existing lighting, the lighting that's in the room, the light coming through the window, to highlight the scene and to tell a story. It's drawing your attention in different ways. There's a body in the bathroom. The light in the bathroom draws, because it's stark compared to the rest of the room, draws your attention to that body straight away. You don't have to be told what's going on. It's all obvious. At one point, there's a laptop in that scene that is quite important. There's natural light from the window which shines on that laptop to really bring it out of the frame, if you like, and draw your attention to it. It tells a story. Before we even get into the hotel room, you have James Bond walking in silhouette and moving forward, and the whole International Man of Mystery thing is really highlighted in a very powerful way with the cinematography here. And then all of a sudden he comes out of the shadow, but he doesn't come out fully. You see his eyes, first of all, and his eyes only. And there's so much in that little sequence. It's really, really good stuff. And you see that same sort of sensibility here with 1917. The cinematography is just amazing. So you have, first of all, the thing that the film has sort of gained its fame for is the constant long takes. The camera just moves with these characters, and they timed it out. It's so amazing the way they've done this. They time out the shots. They've built the sets so that they're able to do what they need to do with the dialogue and walk through them, and they've timed out their walks, and they've got the camera movements also carefully planned out. And then you've got there's cuts in this film, but they're very cleverly hidden cuts. Anytime in a constant long shot that you move through a hard object, or you're transforming sort of from light to dark. So going through a doorway is a great example of this. You can hide a cut in places like that. And this film hides its cuts very well. There's only one very obvious cut, and it makes perfect sense. It's when he encounters that German sniper and he falls backwards down the stairs and he is knocked unconscious. And then he awakens, and obviously time has elapsed. Now that is a very clear cut. That's the very, very obvious cut. But the others, if you know what you're looking for, then obviously you will see those moments where they've hidden the cuts, but they are not so obvious that they stick out and draw you out of the film. They're very, very cleverly hidden. So you get this illusion of this thing being one long, constant, unwavering, unending take. And that adds to the intensity and the drama of what's going on. And they obviously move from set piece to set piece and from scene to scene. They use these set pieces. It's kind of, I said to my brother afterwards, so I went and watched this with at the movies, it's kind of like the thinking man's version of Mad Max Fury Road or Gravity. It's sort of a deeper film, but that same concept where these very immersive journey type films where you go from point A to point B. So it's a very simple sort of thing, but when you get to each set piece, there's more of the story and more of the character development that actually happens. Think of that scene in the village at night with that young girl who's got the baby. That is a very, very, very important moment of character development. And they use the set piece to actually develop that moment in a very powerful way. It's a great example of show, don't tell. There's so much of that in this film. The use of natural lighting again, and I've read a lot about how they did this, and they were waiting sometimes for very long periods of time just to complete shots because they had to get the sun in the right place. They had to get the clouds right because Roger Deakins is using natural lighting. There's a great example of this in that river scene where he ends up in that river and the dawn is starting to break. I mean, it's really awesome. I said to my brother and the other guy who was with Jason, who we went to see it with, I said to him afterwards, It's just phenomenal to see a film where they're not using that sort of night to day or day to night type trickery. He's actually using natural light to film that scene, and that's one of Roger Deakins' hallmarks, his natural light. And man, he is so good at it. And this film is just such a glorious example. Like I said, Deakins, in my humble opinion, is one of the best cinematographers to have ever worked in the movie making industry. He is an artist on a whole nother level, and it's really in the last 10 years that I think he's just grown to that extra level, and you've seen this in a lot of his more recent films. The amazing thing about Roger Deakins is this is a guy who was 70 years of age, which is quite astounding when you think about this. And what this film has the sensibilities and the sort of what I would call the artistic and cinematic passions of a young man. You sort of feel like this is a young man making this film, but this is a guy in his 70s. He's a guy who has what age brings to the table when it comes to artistry. He has experience, and with that experience has come great wisdom. He's seen different technological changes. He's worked with and moved through those things, and you can clearly see that he's harnessing technologies because he understands these technologies in a very intimate way. He's worked with film previously. He's now in the digital space. He understands all these technologies, and he's using them like a master painter would use their brushes and their colour palette to paint in a way that is just that whole nother level up from even a very good journeyman type painter. And a big part of that, as I said, is his experience. He knows things that other cinematographers are yet to learn. As the old saying goes, he's probably forgotten more things than your average cinematographer actually knows. And so what happens is he turns up on a set, he already knows what's going to work and what's not going to work. He has this whole body of experience, and now what he's doing is he's using that and really maximizing that to take this thing to a whole nother level. There's something I think really important about this, and particularly in our age, which is so obsessed with youthfulness and sort of almost worships youth. Roger Deakins is a great example of how age and wisdom is actually a profoundly important thing. Aristotle used to talk about this with philosophy, the idea that you had to have a certain maturity before you could even begin to do philosophy properly. I think the same is true with the arts. And you see this, young artists can be very talented and can have real passion and everything else, but their art is taken to a whole nother and deeper level when you combine that life experience with it. And I think Roger Deakins is just a prime example of this. Go and look at his back catalogue of movies if you don't believe me, and look specifically at what he's done in the last 15 years or so, and you'll see, man, yeah, there's some phenomenal cinematography in the last 15 years. It's like, as he's aged, it's like a fine wine. It's just got better. Now, that brings me to the point of this video, which is what Martin Scorsese said last year. And you probably will remember this, the controversy that was sparked. In my humble opinion, it should have never been controversial at all, but the age in which we live and the way the media is and the way people are, there's this whole love for getting excited and sort of frothing at the mouth over things that really don't need to be frothed at the mouth over. And this was a great example of this. So Martin Scorsese is giving an interview, and he basically says that he mentions Marvel in particular, but he's talking about all franchise films, the big franchise films here. They are, let me quote here, closer to theme parks than they are to movies, as I've known and loved them throughout my life, and that in the end, I don't think they're cinema. Now, he then went and sort of doubled down in a New York Times op-ed piece that he wrote. Well, not so much doubled down, because as I said, that sounds like it was some great controversy. He just explained in more detail what he was meaning. And when you hear his explanation, again, it backs up the point he was making, and it's true what he's saying. Here's what he said in that New York Times op-ed. Cinema is about revelation, aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation. About characters, the complexity of people and their contradictory, sometimes paradoxical natures, the way they can hurt one another and love one another and suddenly come face to face with themselves. Many of the elements that define cinema as I know it are there in Marvel pictures. What's not there is revelation, mystery, or genuine emotional danger. Nothing is at risk. The pictures are made to satisfy a specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes. They are market researched, audience tested, vetted, modified, re-vetted, and re-modified until they're ready for consumption. And I think he is absolutely right about this. Effectively, what he's saying is that the big franchise movies, They're theme parks, they're escapism, but they are consumer products. That's what they are. And he's not wrong. Everyone knows this. I think unless you're someone who's just doesn't want to sort of accept the reality of this, is sort of maybe a really diehard fan who just can't bring themselves to accept it. I think even fans, and I enjoy Marvel movies, I enjoy superhero films, the good ones when they're made. And Scorsese talks about that in this op-ed. They're not bad movies, but they're not, in his opinion, authentic cinema. And I think he's absolutely right. And you know what? This film, 1917, I think really backs that point up. And for some reason, I don't know why this happened, but as soon as the credits were rolling, my first thought about this movie was, I remembered the 2017 Wonder Woman film by Patty Jenkins. And straight away it just came to mind, and I began to contrast, as I was thinking about this as the credits were rolling, those two films. Why I think that happened was because Wonder Woman by Patty Jenkins, which is a good film, it's a good and enjoyable piece of filmmaking in and of its own right. It's a great piece of escapism. Now, I know it's not a Marvel movie, it's a DC film, but it's the same point. It's part of the big franchise system. It's a consumer product that's made for escapist, consumer-driven, spending-focused entertainment. They want you to spend your money with them. A big corporation wants you to give them your money, as opposed to authentic cinema, which is about going that little bit deeper. Well, not a little bit deeper, but I think going much deeper and trying to engage with the human experience and to create a piece of art. Now, Wonder Woman is a very technically proficient film, and what it does that is very, very much the same as 1917 is it uses World War I as a central component of its storytelling. These two films do the same thing. They use World War I as the landscape, if you like, upon which their fictional stories are told. But there is a huge difference between these two. They have the same era and the same moment of world history to tell a fictional tale, but one of those movies, 1917, pulls you deeper into reality through the fiction. The other one, Wonder Woman, uses reality and real history as a plot device to take you completely out of reality into a world of mere spectacle and a fantasy. It's all about the sort of the superficial, escapist type stuff. It's a very big difference. And I think this is really what Scorsese is getting at. One of these movies is a product that is there to be consumed, which is Wonder Woman, and it hints at the human experience and sort of touches on it, but in a very superficial, passing way. Its primary focus is not to do that. Its primary focus is to get bums on seats and to sell tickets and to give you a moment of sort of pure escapism. Now, there's nothing wrong with escapism, going to the cinema, and I think escapism is great. And you know what, quite frankly, I'd appreciate more of it instead of the sort of political propaganda and preaching and sermonizing that we get often in films now. But that's quite different to what's going on in 1917, because 1917 is a piece of art that actually calls you to contemplate the importance of goodness, of truth, and of beauty, and the importance of those things to human flourishing in a very real and tangible way. You don't need to have, as I didn't participate in World War I, but I was immersed in an artistic experience by watching that film that taught me in a very visual and compelling way the importance of goodness, truth, and beauty. And it's contrasted with the ugliness of what this warfare is. And there's a very, very clever thing that happens in the storytelling here. You have this very clever switch that goes on in the film. It starts, and this is how I thought the film was going to play out, was based on, the first quarter, the first third of the film, was I thought that this was a movie about Lance Corporal Blake. I thought this was his story, and that Lance Corporal Schofield is sort of the foil, is the straight man, for want of another term. He's there to sort of bring things out of Lance Corporal Blake. But what happens is, after that moment at the farmhouse, you realize, oh no, this is not Lance Corporal Blake's story at all. And it's not about the two of these guys on a journey of friendship together. This is about Lance Corporal Schofield. It's always been about him. It's a very, very, very clever switch that happens in the storytelling. And all of a sudden, it's about Lance Corporal Schofield. It's his story and his journey that we're going on. And initially, the film sets it up so you don't realize this. And then, now, why is this so important? Well, because what it's doing is, by focusing on Lance Corporal Schofield, is it brings out the sort of central theme of this film, I think, which is the importance of self-giving love. Because that's what motivates Lance Corporal Schofield. Once Corporal Blake is dead, effectively, he could have, sort of safely ambled his way to the front line, as safe, and he could have stayed at that farmhouse or gone with those men and stopped the mission at that point and just carried on with them, or gone back or whatever. He could have done anything else but carry on this dangerous mission. But what does he do? He carries on the dangerous mission. But unlike Lance Corporal Blake had a personal vested interest, saving his own brother. Lance Corporal Schofield doesn't have that personal vested interest. This is now a profound act of self-giving love. He is sacrificing himself in a way that is very, very different. And you realize how this whole idea of self-giving love is so central to this. And you see this really in a very powerful way. This is brought into focus. And it's not until the very final scene where he's sitting down at the end in that field, that open field, and he gets out his personal photographs, and he's got his wife and his daughters. And there's that message, come back to us. And you realize why that scene with the young girl was so important in the bombed out village at night, where she's got the young baby girl with her. You realize this is him reliving his own experience of fatherhood to his own daughters. He is remembering, he is being drawn back into his own deep and profound experience of becoming a father. And in that moment, that really spoke to me. That moment in that village at night with that baby girl, and as you see, there's no exposition. It's all about what's going on the screen with these characters, and you know what's happening. Straight away, I could see this guy is a father. I knew straight away, as soon as I saw his reaction and what's happening here, this guy's a father. And it brought me back to my own fatherhood and my experience of it. I've got 5 children of my own. My eldest daughter, who is now 12 years of age, I still remember when she was born and when I held her in my arms. My eldest child, first child of my own, I held her in my arms. And it was just a profound thing. And so it spoke to me in a very, very deep and real kind of way. And so you see the gravity of a sacrifice only really fully comes into focus at the very end when you realize, oh my gosh, this guy actually has a wife and daughters back home waiting for him, and he still chose to do this thing as a profound act of friendship for Corporal Blake, as a profound act of friendship and love for those other men, for Corporal Blake's brother. This is such a profoundly beautiful thing. It's just so much deeper than anything you see in Wonder Woman, which is not a bad movie. But as a piece of art, it's missing. It doesn't have that depth. It doesn't go, like Scorsese says, it doesn't go that next step. There's that beautiful scene in this film in the forest towards the final act, the final climax of the movie, where you have that young soldier singing the song Wayfaring Stranger. And all of those other soldiers are sitting there in the forest listening intently to this profound moment of beauty. And this profound moment of beauty points to goodness, and it points to truth. And it's such a contrast to the ugliness and the brutal barbarism and violence of this war. And it's such a powerful piece of art that draws your eyes upwards to something greater. This is not about consuming a product. This is not something that you consume and then it leaves you empty, and then so you move on to the next consumer product. This is something that stays with you after the movie has finished. It's almost a week since I've seen that film, and 1917 is still with me. That movie is still with me. That's the difference, and that's what Scorsese is talking about. Like he said, there's nothing wrong with going to Marvel and enjoying those films. But what 1917, when you contrast it with Wonder Woman, they've got that similar sort of setting, recently made films, but you see the difference in the way that 1917 really goes that extra mile, the way that 1917 is a piece of art, a profoundly beautiful piece of art, not just a good, well-produced, technically well-made film. This is a piece of art. It's taking us somewhere deeper. It's taking us into goodness, truth, and beauty. It's trying to illustrate these things and use cinema as the art form, as the canvas to really do that in a very powerful way. And that, for me, is why in the last year, 1917 is one of the 2 best films, I think, that was ever released, or certainly that I've seen. The Joker was phenomenal. This one's different, but just equally as profoundly important, I think, and what it has to say about the human experience. And as I said, that really backs up, that really hammers home the point that Martin Scorsese was making last year, which should not have been controversial at all. But I'm hardly surprised in an age of consumerism where we just consume everything, including other people now. Think about Tinder. It's an exercise in consumerism, looking for something that you can purchase, if you like, for a momentary exchange. It's a form of taking a human person, reducing them into a commodity, to a consumer product, and then you move on again very quickly. And so we live in an age like that, and to live in that age, I'm not surprised that people got upset and failed to perhaps understand what Scorsese was really saying here, and got a bit offended by it. But really, we shouldn't have been, because I think Scorsese is making a really valid, very important point. And this important point is not just about cinema. It's also about our culture. It's also about the way that we engage as human persons with the world around us. Do we actually contemplate deeply? Do we contribute to the world in a way that is good, true, and beautiful? Are we stopping to think more deeply about issues, or are we stuck in that vacuous, superficial, consumerist mindset and way of approaching the world, where you just consume, move on, consume, move on, consume, move on, and we don't have time to stop and contemplate and to actually adjust and to think deeply and to have a deep and profound interior life of our own about the world around us and about the way we interact with other people. 1917, it's a profoundly beautiful film. If you haven't seen it, you really should go and see it. This is a film that without a doubt will be added to my movie collection. Thank you again for tuning in. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to the channel. Please, if you want to support the channel, I really appreciate everyone who has given and contributed to this channel. It's really enabling it to keep happening and to keep going from strength to strength. You can leave a tip in the tip jar below. There's a PayPal link for that, or there's one on the homepage on the YouTube channel. If the one below doesn't work for you, click on the button on the homepage. You can become a regular patron on Patreon. And a huge thank you, as I said, to everyone else who's contributing and supporting the channel. I really, really appreciate that. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.